Rangefinder or SLR for film street photography. That's the topic of today's video. Hello guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome to Bangkok. Before I kick off this video, let me remind you that I will have a workshop here in Bangkok on January 3rd to January 5th next year, 2020. It will be a street photography workshop here. If you want to come and join me for this workshop, that is for 3 days, hardcore street photography, 3 days. The link will be in the description box down below. All right, let's talk about some differences first. And the first, and I think the most obvious difference is that on an SLR, you basically, if you look through the viewfinder, you're looking through the lens. On a rangefinder, it's a little bit different because you're not looking through the lens. Instead, you're looking through this window here. On a rangefinder, it doesn't matter what focal length you have attached to the lens. What you see through the viewfinder is pretty much the same. The only thing that will differ from focal length to focal length is the frame lines that will be displayed in the viewfinder. As you might know, I like to shoot 28mm, and for me this is perfect because it basically covers the whole viewfinder, and I have maybe little room outside of the frame line, so I can basically see what's walking in the frame, which is very convenient. Even though maybe my subject might not be in the frame, I can still see it, so I can see what people are doing, and if things are perfect, I can just move over and take the shot. That's pretty convenient. What is also pretty convenient is that if I'm looking through the viewfinder using my right eye, my left eye, most of the time I let it just open so I can still see what's going on here, even though I'm looking through the viewfinder. For some of you it might be a little strange to let the eye open, and but the thing is, if you practice this, you might get used to it, so like I did, and yeah, that's something I really like, and that is only possible here on a rangefinder. Another thing that is really nice on a rangefinder is if you're using zone focusing, that like I do, and let's say I stop the lens down to f11 and I set my focus to 1 meter. If I look through here, it doesn't matter what kind of aperture I'm picking because everything will be crystal clear. On an SLR, it's a little bit different because if I stop down the lens to f11 and focus it to, let's say, 1 meter, and if I look through the viewfinder, pretty much everything beyond 1 meter will be blurry. That's because the camera will stop down the lens to f11 when I take the shot. Otherwise, the viewfinder would get a little dark. So yeah, that's what I really like about rangefinders, because it doesn't matter what aperture, the viewfinder is always crystal clear, and I can see basically almost to infinity. That is really cool. Now you might think that the viewfinder of a rangefinder is much superior compared to an SLR because of the reasons that I just mentioned, but not entirely, because this one has some limitations, and it's perfect if you shoot 28 or 35 millimeters. But if you want to shoot 50 millimeters or longer, then maybe an SLR is better, because the frame lines in here for 50 or maybe 75, they are very small. So it's really hard to frame your shot perfectly. So I would suggest, if you want to shoot longer lenses than 35, an SLR might be better. Or you can pick up a Leica M3, for instance, which has a rangefinder, like the viewfinder is pretty much for 50 millimeter or longer. But then you have the problem, if you want to shoot wider than that, it's not as easy because you have to use an external finder. Now, you don't have these limitations when you're shooting an SLR, but there's also another thing that is better if you're shooting an SLR, and that is the parallax effect that you will have with a rangefinder. It's not a big problem if your subject is far away, but if your subject is closer to you, you have to get used to it, and you have to keep that in mind when shooting. If you don't know what it is, maybe look at something, maybe let's say 10 meters away, and close one eye, and then look at it with your other eye, and you will see that the perspective is not 100% the same, and so it's shifting a little bit. And that is pretty much the same thing you have with the rangefinder, because you're not looking through the lens, you're looking through here, and you have a certain distance here, and this will give the perspective a slight change. So you have to keep this in mind, especially if you're shooting something really up close and it's right in front of your lens, because you're looking through the viewfinder and you don't really see it, but it might cover your lens. So that can become very tricky, and that's something to absolutely keep in mind. besides the difference in the viewfinder experience, there are a couple more things you have to keep in mind when choosing an SLR or a rangefinder for shooting street photography. Rangefinder lenses, especially the Leica M-mount lenses, often come with a focusing tab. And that is extremely useful, because even though you're not looking through the lens, you pretty much know exactly where your focusing is, especially if you're using zone focusing, and it becomes almost muscle memory. So if you're at f8 or f11, you know, okay, this is further away, medium distance, close distance. So before getting up the camera, you already have set your focus. And I mean, you basically don't need to focus, which makes it super fast to shoot a rangefinder. On the other hand, when it comes to features, an SLR can be much more modern than a rangefinder. They have a more sophisticated metering, and some of them, they have really good autofocus, even the film ones. And the last generation of the film cameras, the autofocus is really good. And they also can shoot burst mode, so that's usually not something you want to do with a rangefinder, and you cannot do with a rangefinder. Also, SLRs let you focus much closer than a rangefinder. On Leica M lenses, for instance, usually the minimum focus distance is 0.7 meters, and that is maybe roughly here. With an SLR. This lens, for instance, it's 0.38, so it's I can get up that close, so that might be a difference to keep in mind as well. Another area where SLRs usually have an advantage is the shutter speeds, because, for instance, this Nikon FM2 goes to 1/4000th of a second. I mean, the Leica M6 goes to 1/1000th, so a huge difference. And also, if you want to shoot flash, this guy here syncs up to 1/250th of a second. The Leica officially only goes to 1/45th. That's a big difference. So if you want to shoot flash, maybe you should stick to an SLR, especially if you shoot in the daytime. On the other hand, the shutter sound on a SLR is usually much louder and more noticeable than on a rangefinder, because there's a mirror that has to be removed in order to take a photo. On a rangefinder, there's no such thing, so usually a rangefinder is more quiet, but I'm only talking for the Leica ones. I haven't shot the Zeiss or the Voigtlander, because apparently they're a little bit louder than the Leicas, but yeah, it's also something to keep in mind. If you're on a tight budget, maybe an SLR is the way to go, because these cameras can be had for 100 euros, $100 roughly, sometimes even with the lens, which is a pretty good deal. For instance, I've seen Nikon FM2s in Korea for around 170 euros, which is not bad. And if you get a cheap lens, you're probably maybe 200 to 250 euros, which is pretty good, because it's a very nice camera. On the other hand, if you want to shoot a rangefinder, and especially if you want to shoot a Leica one, sometimes you can find an M2 for really cheap-ish, around 500 to 600 if it's a little beat up. And if you buy a Voigtlander lens, let's say rangefinder and lens, you're looking at around 1,000 euros roughly. But of course, this is like the minimum you have to spend. Basically, prices can go up quite a bit more than that. When it comes to loading the camera, I have to say that I much more prefer the system on the Leica, especially here on the Leica M6. For me, that works very easily, and I've done it hundreds of times. On this SLR, for instance, for me, sometimes it feels a little fiddly. But the reason might also be that it's just me, because I'm more used to put a new roll into the Leica M6, and for me that's almost like muscle memory, and even without looking at the camera I could probably put a new roll of film in here. So guys, in general, I prefer for street photography the way rangefinders work. This is pretty much for me the holy grail, and I've used rangefinders for a long time now, and yeah, I like them a lot. But let me know in the comments down below what you prefer, if you shoot a rangefinder or prefer a rangefinder, or if you rather shoot an SLR. And also let me know in the comments down below if I forgot anything that is also important and also makes a big difference between those two camera systems. Yeah, other than that, of course, check out my Zine 28 if you haven't checked it out, that I shot with my Leica M6 in Egypt. And the first one that is using this code here will get 20% off at checkout. So link will be in the description box down below. And yeah, as always, if you like the video, give a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and we will see each other very soon in the next video. Until then, auf Wiedersehen.